Hello everyone, how's it going? Today I'm going to talk about the 1982 science fiction film Blade Runner. I have my old DVD set I bought some time ago right here. Of course, Blade Runner is part of the whole group of science fiction films that came out in 1982 that all became classics. Blade Runner is such a singular vision, and I think what's interesting is all these films are so different, and Blade Runner is definitely a unique film in many regards, and a very influential film on the look of science fiction movies as well. Directed by Ridley Scott, coming off of Alien, it was based on the novel by Phillip K. The screenplay by Hampton Fancher, and the other screenwriter credited was David Peoples, also helped out on the screenplay. And that's one of the big parts of Blade Runner is its journey from the book to screen, and it's been a long time since I read the novel, but a lot was changed from the going into the book from the novel. There was, and I'm not really gonna get into all that. I don't recall all the big changes, but really the screenplay was going for this futuristic film noir aesthetic, but also what an urban landscape might look like in the year 2019. So in 1982, looking about 40 years, almost 40 years into the future. And that's really what we get when the first shot of the movie, just this Los Angeles, and I believe the idea was Los Angeles and San Francisco have kind of become this megalopolis combined into one large city, and although the film never quite alludes to it, there's been environmental disaster and possibly nuclear disasters and things like this, so it's like we're living in the city, there's so much smog, it's like we're living at night all the time, all the neon, all of the futuristic buildings and all that. So just for that alone, it's such a distinct vision of the future. And I know there's a book written about the making of film, a big book called Future Noir by Paul Salmon, which is just a really detailed account of everything from pre-production of the film to the aftermath and the legacy, extensive account of the production of the film, just very detailed. And one of the things I was going to mention was how the so much planning went into the city, and initially Ridley Scott wanted to film on an actual city. I think New York City was really the place he wanted to do it, but it was just found out it was just logistically impossible to film a movie of this scale on location, so they had to do it on the back lot of the studio, and to build this whole city, which the casting crew called Ridleyville, and I think some movies you'll watch and you hear about the production and how difficult it was. In some movies it doesn't really show necessarily. Like I think if you watch Jaws, the film looks seamless. Like you don't get the impression how difficult it was to make it. That's just me. But Blade Runner, watching this film, you're like, wow, this must have been an absolute nightmare at times to try to film this movie with everything you have going on the frame of the screen. And I remember I've shown this film to students before, and I remember one time a student said where this movie felt like sensory overload, where it was almost too much. This movie, there's too much going on screen, and that's kind of true. There is, well, what's happening with the story and the characters and everything, but it is, every time I watch this movie I get that feeling. And yeah, this is the DVD, just some frames from the movie there, of course starring Harrison Ford as Rick Deckard, and we have some of the other characters here. Sean Young as Rachel, Rutger Hauer there, and the character of Sebastian. So And each performance in the film is very distinct as well. Even the performances that don't get a lot of screen time are memorable in Blade Runner. Just a little bit of background on the story. As I said, we're in the future, and this is more pronounced in the book, I remember, where a lot of the Earth's population, or those with the means, have left Earth to live on Mars or other moons or whatever, because Earth has just simply become uninhabitable in the future. And you get that impression with the movie. And we also have a future where there's artificial intelligence, where the line between human and artificial intelligence has really started to blur, where it's very difficult to tell who is human and who's not, and that's a big part. That's like the first scene of the movie where they're doing the test to try to figure out who's human and who's not. Yeah. So, and these renegade replicants from Offworld have come to Earth, and they want to get revenge on their creator, because these artificial humans have a very limited lifespan of 4 years, I believe, and they want to find their creator and the Tyrell Corporation, and get their revenge, or even hope that he can help them. Harrison Ford, of course, I mentioned, stars in the film. This is him coming off of, well known for Star Wars, well known for Raiders of the Lost Ark the year before. But Harrison Ford was not a big movie star overnight. He was almost left the business famously in the 70s, and then he was cast in Star Wars, which became a big hit. The films he did after Star Wars were fairly unremarkable, didn't do a lot for him, but luckily Lucas and Spielberg came back and gave him the role of Indiana Jones, which lifted his career, and then he goes and does Blade Runner. And that can be, I think anyone who goes into this film expecting the Harrison Ford of those earlier roles won't get it. Rick Deckard, as he plays him, is a really cold character, almost a cipher throughout the film. The whole question of whether Deckard is even a human being or not, comes up, and Ridley Scott's made quite a thing about that, and I know Harrison Ford has his own opinions on that, but it's a very different type of Harrison Ford performance, and it can be off-putting if this was before his star persona, I suppose, was set in stone. So it is a chance to see him in a different role. But Deckard is a Blade Runner who are a former Blade Runner. These are people who hunt down replicants and retire them, as they say. So Deckard is called out of retirement, and by M. Emmett Walsh, who is his old boss, I guess, and has Deckard to find these renegade replicants and to see what they want, is what gets the story going. So we have a detective story, and we also have a story about what it means to be human, which is really the big theme in the film. And I think it's not, and I think what works in Blade Runner is how it doesn't really spoon feed that theme to us too much, where it just, as the film unfolds, I think it raises all sorts of questions about consciousness and humanity and all these things, and I think it works quite well in that way. Edward James Olmos is in here in an early role as Gaff, as another detective, a kind of rival of Deckard's. But yeah, Gaff is such an interesting character too. I always wish we had more Gaff in the movie, because he's interesting, and I know the book talks about Olmos kind of invented his own language for the character, this idea of you have like English and Spanish and Japanese all kind of blending into a new type of language. So that was one thing that, for a small role, he put a lot of work into it as far as developing the language. And as far as the replicants go, there's Brian James, who we see at the beginning of the film, who is the, kind of brings, he's like, I guess, kind of a more menacing replicant. And of course there's Daryl Hannah as Pris, who another great really good early performance from Daryl Hannah, where she plays her character as likable and yeah, and her she kind of has a little friendship, strikes up a friendship with the Sebastian character played by William Sanderson, and she seems to be a bit more a kindliness to her that she brings to her character. And then of course we have Sean Young as Rachel, who is who Deckard meets at the Tyrell Corporation, and of course that's a big part of the story, the love story where Deckard falls in love with Rachel, and raising questions about emotion and love and all these things, which are great. Joanna Cassidy is in here as Salome. She's who Deckard tracks down, and memorable in her scenes, and yeah, just a very memorable cast. And of course Rutger Hauer as Roy Batty, the menacing but replicant, but who is also full of pathos and has a poetic nature about him as well, which makes his character really interesting. So Deckard is investigating. He meets Rachel, and he is questioning what he's doing. Is it okay to kill these replicants, especially if these beings have real emotions and can actually feel real things? It raises questions. I think certainly in 1982 people weren't necessarily prepared for. I don't know if mainstream movies had dealt with this before, but I think the way this Blade Runner setting it in such a kind of such a singular naturalistic type of world made that question, I think, more palpable for audiences, and the line between human and non-human is really good, and he's tracks him down in these memorable scenes where he finds Joanna Cassidy and kills her, and eventually kills Pris, the Daryl Hannah character, and it tells us Deckard is such an anti-hero, where we don't questioning, is he doing the right thing, and I guess his character arc moves towards questioning what he's doing in this world and all that. So eventually the climax of the movie moves towards the corporation, which there's the actor Joe Turkel, who plays the head of the Tyrell Corporation, and of course he's known from the Stanley Kubrick movies. He was in The Shining and Pass of Glory, and that's really where the climax of the movie plays out, and ending with that duel between Batty and Deckard, and of course the famous scenes there. Yeah, and I think it's just the look of the movie is so distinct. That aqua blue sheen is so memorable throughout the film, and the music is also memorable by. So Vangelis, very memorable score, and the look of the film, the production design by Sid Mead, who was a bit of a futurist with his architecture, and just creating a very memorable look through the movie. The use of rain throughout the film is, it's such a contained world where it is a movie you can really get lost in, and just the entire world that's created here. It's a cold film on a lot of levels. I think which can make it, maybe made it too off-putting to audiences in 1982, and of course through the years it gained I guess a cult following, I guess you could say. We're getting close to the home video boom of VHS and beta and Laserdisc and all that, where people were able to watch the film at home, and a passionate fan base began to gather around the film. And of course and then we got the different versions, which this DVD set has those different versions of the film. There was the director's cut in '92 that Ridley Scott put out. There was an international cut as well, and then there was the final cut, as it's called, which I think in the 2000s, which was in the introduction, Ridley Scott says that's his preferred version, and that's usually the one I watch. I know the big difference is that theatrical version has the narration, which was again a very controversial thing, kind of put in under protest. The studio pushed it because they felt the audience needed to be walked through the story a little bit more, and I've heard different opinions on the narration. Some people don't mind it, some find it distracting, but it is what it is. But it does kind of give it that more hard-boiled noirish feel to it. But I don't know if I guess I always prefer the final cut version. Is usually the one that I will watch. And yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of mysteries of the film. Like I said, whether Deckard is a replicant or not is always a big debate, and questions about, of course, in the death scene, Rutger Hauer's death scene, is that very famous line about tears in the rain, and where we see, I guess, his humanity, his consciousness comes out in that scene, which is still a great moment in the film, and that we get here. And like I said, I know the making of the film, it was a difficult one. Harrison Ford also didn't quite get along with Ridley Scott. Neither did Sean Young, and Ridley Scott was like a real taskmaster in these days of, they were shooting at night all the time, and the crew wasn't too crazy about some of his working methods. And of course that's all in the book. I mentioned the book gets into that. So there was a lot of behind the scenes things happening, and with the post production and all this. And of course so there's an interesting history to Blade Runner. It's almost sometimes, maybe I shouldn't say this, almost more interesting than the movie itself, as far as the making of the movie and then the aftermath of the movie are both really interesting stories as far as how it caught hold, this story. So yeah, that's about all I have to say on Blade Runner. Thanks for watching, and I will talk to you later. Bye.